sitting on the edge of the highway waiting to catch speeders, a state police officer saw a car driving along at 22 miles per hour. He thinks to himself, that car is just as dangerous as a speeder. So, he turns his lights on and pulls the car over. Approaching the car, he notices there are 5 old ladies, 2 at the front and 3 at the back, wide-eyed and looking like ghosts. The driver, obviously confused, said, "Officer, I don't understand, I wasn't doing over the speed limit. What did you pull me over for?" "Ma'am," the officer said, "you should know that driving slower than the speed limit can also be dangerous." "Slower than the speed limit?" "No, sir. I was doing exactly 22 miles an hour, the old woman said proudly. The officer, trying not to laugh, explains that 22 is the route number, not the speed limit. A little embarrassed, the woman smiled and thanked the officer for pointing out her error. "Before I go, ma'am, I have to ask, is everyone okay? These women seem badly shaken and haven't said a word since I pulled you over." "Oh, they'll be all right in a minute, officer. We just got off Route 142. One night at a local bar frequented by a bunch of deer hunters who were waiting for the opening day of deer season, the local sheriff scoped out the joint for possible drunk drivers. As he waited, eventually a patron stumbled out of the bar, fumbled for his keys, tried them in 3 different cars until he finally found his, got inside and rested his head on the steering wheel. The deputy knew he had his drunk driver, so now all he had to do was wait for him to start his engine and pull out of the lot. A few hours passed by and most of the other deer hunters had left by then, when the patron abruptly lifted his head, cranked the car up and drove out of the lot like a bat out of hell. The deputy followed him and stopped him promptly. He administered the breathalyzer test and it read 0.00. Confused, the deputy asked the driver what the hell was going on. The driver looked at him innocently and said, "Well, tonight I'm the designated decoy."
According to the FBI, most modern-day bank robberies are unsophisticated and unprofessional crimes committed by young male repeat offenders who apparently don't know the first thing about their business. This information was included in an interesting, amusing article titled "How Not to Rob a Bank" by Tim Clark, which appeared in the 1987 edition of the Old Farmer's Almanac. Clark reported that in spite of the widespread use of surveillance cameras, 76% of bank robbers use no disguise, 86% never study the bank before robbing it, and 95% make no long-range plans for concealing the loot. Thus, he offered this advice to would-be bank robbers along with examples of what can happen if the rules aren't followed. 1. Pick the right bank. Clark advises that you don't follow the lead of the fellow in Anaheim who tried to hold up a bank that was no longer in business and had no money. On the other hand, you don't want to be too familiar with the bank. A California robber ran into his mother while making his getaway. She turned him in. 2. Approach the right teller. Granted, Clark says, this is harder to plan. One teller in Springfield, Mass. followed the hold-up man out of the bank and down the street until she saw him go into a restaurant. She hailed a passing police car, and the police picked him up. Another teller was given a hold-up note by a robber, and her father, who was next in line, wrestled the man to the ground and sat on him until authorities arrived. 3. Don't sign your demand note. Demand notes have been written on the back of a subpoena issued in the name of a bank robber in Pittsburgh, on an envelope bearing the name and address of another in Detroit and in East Hartford, Conn. On the back of a withdrawal slip giving the robber's signature and account number. 4. Beware of dangerous vegetables. A man in White Plains, NY, tried to hold up a bank with a zucchini. The police captured him at his house, where he showed them his weapon. 5. Avoid being fussy. A robber in Panorama City gave a teller a note saying, "I have a gun. Give me all your 20s in this envelope." The teller said, "All I've got is 2 20s. The robber took them and left. 6. Don't advertise. A hold-up man thought that if he smeared mercury ointment on his face, it would make him invisible to the cameras. Actually, it accentuated his features, giving authorities a much clearer picture. Bank robbers in Minnesota and California tried to create a diversion by throwing stolen money out of the windows of their cars. They succeeded only in drawing attention to themselves. 7. Take right turns only. Avoid the sad fate of the thieves in Florida who took a wrong turn and ended up on the Homestead Air Force Base. They drove up to a military police guardhouse and, thinking it was a tool booth, offered the security men money. 8. Provide your own transportation. It is not clever to borrow the teller's car, which she carefully described to police. This resulted in the most quickly solved bank robbery in the history of Pittsfield, Mass. 9. Don't be too sensitive. In these days of exploding die packs, stuffing the cash into your pants can lead to embarrassing stains, Clark points out, not to mention severe burns in sensitive places as bandits in San Diego and Boston painfully discovered. 10. Consider another line of work. One nervous Newport, R.I., robber, while trying to stuff his ill-gotten gains into his shirt pocket, shot himself in the head and died instantly. Then there was the case of the hopeful criminal in Swansea, Mass., who, when the teller told him she had no money, fainted. He was still unconscious when the police arrived. In view of such ineptitude, it is not surprising that in 1978 and 1979, for example, federal and state officers made arrests in 69% of the bank hold-ups reported.